Hi everybody, I want to go over the Confessions Study Guide number 2 with you quickly. It'll be like the last time where I will not hit the questions that required you to pick the quote and then discuss the context and why you found it interesting, nor the junior, senior, or honor section, but just the few questions from each book. So the Study Guide 2 starts with book 4. And so question 1 talks about the practice of the soothsayers that Augustine abhorred, and it was the animal sacrifice that disgusted him, and that was found from page 56. And he consulted, this is question 2, he called them mathematicians, but if you read the note there on page 56, it said these guys were actually astrologers. Why was he overcome with sadness during this point in his life? His close friend died, and he thought he really could not live without this friend. This was also from page 59. And then what gifts did he have? You could have said a couple of different things on page 70. He was telling us about how he had written certain books at this point. So a gift would be he was a writer. He was skilled as a writer. From page 71, he had great understanding, very keen understanding. And he actually says he doesn't need anyone to explain things to him at this point. And you're going to see this. Let's go down to book 5. This goes with question 1. He had such great understanding and really intellect and knowledge that he's disappointed when he meets Faustus, the great teacher, because at first on page 81 it says he wasn't allowed to ask him any questions and to discuss things with him. But then he finds out that Faustus is not very learned, except in the discipline of literature. So he says he's not very learned in liberal sciences, except literature. And then he goes on to say, but he's not that learned in literature either. And this was a great disappointment to him. All right, so question 2 from book 5. Why does he go to Rome? Talks about the temperament of the students and the behavior of the students there. This is from page 83. And then he deceives his mother, and he tells this tale of deceiving her on page 84, where he's getting ready to embark to Rome, and she comes down to the boat, standing there with him, and somehow he gets her to spend the night somewhere away from the boat, and that's when he leaves in the middle of the night without telling her goodbye. And then question 4, this is kind of a turning point. He meets a bishop named Ambrose, and this is detailed on page 90. And what is the appeal of this person? And we're told that Ambrose treats him like a father would have treated him, and he treats him with great kindness. And if you remember, Augustine did not have a good relationship with his dad, and so someone who represents this kind of figure to him would be very appealing to him. All right, book 6. What did Monica do which was forbidden by Bishop Ambrose, and why was it forbidden? So she had the practice of, and this is detailed on page 96, she had the practice of bringing a meal, some bread, and some wine, sometimes diluted, to different people in the area. And it was forbidden, particularly the wine part, because it could possibly give an occasion to gluttony for some people, or it was similar to some of the pagan practices and the superstitions with pagan religion at the time. So that's why it was forbidden. Number 2. What is the overarching premise of Epicurus's philosophy? This was on page 114. They believed that there was no life after death for the soul. Therefore, you would not be treated according to your deeds. because there's no afterlife. So it's kind of this pleasure. You can have this perpetual pleasure in this life because you don't have to have any fear of a loss later on. And this is contrary to what Augustine dreaded as punishment for his sins. This is on the bottom of 113. He did fear judgment after death for his deeds. Okay, Book 7. How did Augustine perceive God at this time in his life? He had some true concepts of God, but he still had some skewed concepts of God. So there's a couple of different things you could have said for this response. On page 117, he does talk about the true God who is incorruptible and immutable, but he also on page 118 starts talking about this unbiblical view of God's omnipresence. So there are a couple of things there that you could have said. Now, what is the biblical explanation of evil? On page 119, he talks about man's free will giving rise to evil. He also on page 120 discusses the devil's role in the origin of evil. Question 3 from Book 7. What did Augustine spend much time trying to discover? And again, from page 120 and 121, it's this origin of evil, or how evil crept into creation. And he goes back to it again on page 124. So this concept really, he struggled with this concept for a significant amount of time. Question 4 there, our last question. What books of scripture did Augustine begin to read first and why? Well, he began to read from Paul, the Apostle Paul, first. This is on pages 136 to 137, and he tells us on page 135 that after he read the books of the Platonists, he desired this search for truth, but he found that he had no strength to enjoy God, and he realized he could not enjoy God apart from Christ, who is the Word. Therefore, he had to get into the Scriptures. And I just think it's fascinating how, as he's writing, you have his own words and then Scripture just mingled in. And unless you know those Scriptures, you don't know where one stops and one starts and one starts and one stops. And I was trying to write down scriptures in the margin, but he goes from one to the other. It's hard to keep up. But in our edition, we do have many of the scripture references in the footnotes there for us. So I hope you're enjoying it. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch.